Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the A24 project here on the Nerd Party Network, where we make our way through the A24 filmography and along the way bring you interviews with the talent involved in front of and behind the camera. We've been on a bit of a break recently as we've been waiting for some A24 films to arrive here in the UK, and thankfully Beau is Afraid is just on the horizon, along with a few others. But we return with an interview, and it's with a returning guest, Jack W. Gregory, who also returned in Joanna Hogg's The Souvenir Part 2 as Ray. Jack also acted as a consultant on the first film, sharing his experience of addiction to help inform the authenticity of the story and performances in the film. Jack shares his journey from drug addiction to becoming an actor, director and journalist, and his experiences working on the acclaimed Souvenir series. Thanks so much to Jack for joining us once again, and you can find our first interview with him in episode 104 when we reflected on The Souvenir. Enjoy the show.
Is this all there is?
Welcome back to the show, Jack. You kind of also made your return in The Souvenir Part 2, but before we dive into the sequel, you joined us before to talk about Part 1 and your role and the contribution into the series. But for those who've maybe not listened to that episode, can you share with us what your involvement was in Part 1?
So I was contacted by a friend of mine, Donna Triggs, who was working on casting, and she, knowing that I was a recovering drug addict, and had been for some time. I was I think I must have been about 18 months sober or something like that back at that time. Joe Hogg had asked, for someone who'd sort of lived that. She wanted authenticity all the way through the film. So she just wanted, she wanted someone that knew about the sort of lifestyle. I was an old air base in Norfolk, about 15 miles from where I live, 20 miles from where I live, called West Raynham. And went down there to speak to her. And yeah, she found out that, that I was a poet and that I was a recovering addict. And she just wanted to, some authenticity. So I said, well, yeah, this is me. This is what I've done. After the conversation, she had me play Ray, which is a relatively small part, or intruder, as it's billed on IMDb. She wanted me to help with being a consultant to actually help the production have a more of an input from addicts, as the film is about addiction.
And Joanna Hogg always had sort of the Souvenir mind for two parts. Did she let you know when you were working on the first part her plans for a sequel and your return, or were you pleasantly surprised when that message came along?
No, she did. She'd said that the Souvenir was based in two parts. For anybody that hasn't seen it, spoilers, I do apologise, but I wasn't told that Tom wasn't coming back for the second one, so I didn't know how it was going to end. It was initially Robert Pattinson, but obviously he got the Batman and wasn't able to do it. So Harris came on board, and a couple of others. But she'd said to me, it's going to be a two-parter. I'd like you to come back. On my last day, she said, I'd like you to come back for the second part. It's going to be a year or so down the line, but I'd like you to come back and do the same. And I was like, yeah, that'll be fantastic. And I knew roughly when it was coming, but wasn't too sure. I turned down the chance to go and work on Jingle Jangle in Norwich, because I live about 9 miles outside Norwich, to go work on part 2. I was contracted for about 5 days, but I only did 2 and some ADR work.
This time we learned more about your involvement with Tom Burke's Anthony and kind of the company he'd been keeping when he wasn't with Julie. What did kind of Joanna tell you about the role of Ray?
So she gave Ray to me, and that was always the understanding from the start, from part one, with any characters that were created. I put myself into Ray. The bit where I was coming downstairs, I did a few different ways. I tried a funny way and I tried other ways. But I wanted to give Ray a little bit of vulnerability. So when I came back for part two, we were on the same housing estate, pretty much in the same house. No, we weren't in the same house. We were in a different house, but they filmed at the same front door. And none of us were told anything about who we were going to be working with. It was just you're thrown in at the deep end. And it's all sort of improvised and then built up by Joanna throwing her thoughts into it. So I'd been asked a few days before by Donna Triggs if I had any musician friends. So I got a few of my musician friends down there, Scotty. It was great to work with Stephen Higgins again. We'd initially met on the first one. We've worked a few times on various productions throughout Norfolk as well since then. But I wanted to keep Ray sort of put on a lot of weight since the first since the first part. I was around about 15 stone when I filmed the second part. And that was because I'd been bulking up for an amateur MMA fight, but my health had got worse and I wasn't able to do it. My MS had kicked in and, I couldn't do it. So I'd started to put a lot of weight on. So I'd grown my beard, and it got cut down. I had grown my hair, but they wanted to shave it, which was kind of okay with me because it was kind of classic Ray. And yeah, so I mean, we filmed it in a few different ways. There was bits where I spoke, but I was asked to afterwards to do sort of some ADR. I was also brought in on the scene where they were filming the intruder scene where she's making a film, and I was brought in to give it a bit of I was dressed as Ray. I don't think they ever planned on using me for it, but I was dressed as Ray, and that's where I met Harris, and it was good. It's a lot of time standing around an old hangar. It was quite, lots of crafty food just outside. So it was, it was all right. They kept us sort of well fed
And then, you talk about Harris there. I mean, since kind of the Souvenir, his kind of stars continue to rise as well. I think Triangle of Sadness certainly seems to be making a lot of waves on the sort of the Oscar and awards front as well. Did you get an early impression of his kind of talent when you were working alongside him?
Yeah, I mean, I'd seen him in County Lines, so I knew he'd done that. We spoke briefly, and he was really, really nice. And he had a lot planned for afterwards. I think he knew his career trajectory was going on. He followed me on Twitter, and said that if he could offer me any work at some point, that he would. He was really nice. Really pleasant to work with, really polite, and he really sort of valued, although he'd done county lines, it did value knowing some of the lingo, especially back in the 80s. It wasn't much different in the 90s when I was growing up and living that life. So,
Excellent. You've obviously spoken about kind of your experiences with drugs in the past. What's it like to kind of film that sort of scene and bring to life that kind of experience? Again, does there become a bit of an element perhaps of like anxiety about putting yourself in that headspace of going back to that times, or is it something that's perhaps more reflective for you, Jack?
when I first did it, it was quite bizarre on the first one. Like I say, I'd got sober 2014, and this was 2016. And I worked with the art department on the bit where they show all the works where he lines them all out. We made the heroin cooker. We dirtied up the foil. There were other recovering addicts around at the time, which was good. And I was able to sort of sit down and chat with them about any concerns that I had. And the second one, it was supposed to be a joint that we were smoking, but it was basically green tea that sold as tobacco for film.
You look like in that scene that you've got a lot of empathy and perhaps an element of like guilt as well when she asks, how did Anthony spend those last days? Because he's clearly spent it with you and your group. What did you think kind of happened to Anthony in that time?
Well, I just kind of saw it as similar to what happened to me. As I said before, I went to 8 funerals in 7 days at one point of people that had lost to drug addiction. So it was sort of really, I was a couple of more years on there, a year or so more on there sober. So it was okay, but I just kind of felt, like you say, an empathy towards it. It felt quite familiar. It was quite familiar to when I found myself when I got sober, and I was 26th of June 2014. I was 10 p.m. I was sat in a crack house, and I'd lost everything. I lived on the street. I'd lost my daughter, I'd lost my kids, I'd lost my grandkids, I'd lost my family. And I just sat in this crack house and I said, look, God, I don't even know if you exist. But if you do, please take away this hunger for drugs and or take away my life. I didn't want to live like it anymore. And I meant it. And I took an almighty blast of this crack pipe, and the last thing I'm going to do is sleep on it. But I fell asleep quite soon afterwards, and I woke up at 4 minutes past 12 on the 26th of June 2014, and I haven't used a day since. So when we were making that scene, I kind of saw that as, when Anthony died, it was kind of me and my desperation in my desperation. So I could feel that. And then, you had Hannah that was sat there and she was talking, and it all felt all so familiar, and it all felt quite heartbreaking. So those looks, it was a look of empathy. I think it was a little upsetting. I'm not going to lie. But I kept it in. Because we just filmed it over and over and over again. Joe likes to work over and over again to make sure it comes right. So yeah, that look, those glances. I've only just recently seen it again. I filmed some ADR, and I did film some a conversation between me and Scotty, who was the guy that answered the door. Obviously, that wasn't used, but I liked the way that Joanna used it because it showed that vulnerable side of Ray. It showed that human side of Ray. There's so many things out there. There's so many films. There's so many TV programs that show the rough side of addiction. That that they show it bones and all, but they very rarely show the tenderness. They very rarely show the vulnerability. They very rarely show the sadness. And I like that Joanna did that.
Yeah, and it was certainly captured in your performance as well, Jack. And how do you then, film a scene like that, and then how do you go home that night? How do you decompress? How do you unwind or decompress after filming a scene like that, which, as even just hearing you talk is something so personal and quite difficult as well.
Yeah, I mean that film took that scene took about 4 hours to film. 4 hours, 4.5 hours. It might not, it might seem a long time to, some people, but Joanna is a perfectionist, so she wanted it over and over again. It might have even been like 5-6 hours. I remember they brought us chips because on the estate there was a chip van sort of thing, and we filmed some other bits. So I think by the time I got home, it was 10 o'clock. With anything really, doing that or the podcast that I do or podcast that I host, I always wind down with a cup of coffee. That's my only vice that I have left. I don't drink, I don't smoke. I gave up smoking back in 2021, no, 2018, and I gave up vaping in 2021. So, I have a coffee. It helps me calm. I have a divergent mind. I'm on the verge of autism, so it calms me. So I sit and I drink my coffee, and I just reflect on what has happened, where I've come from, to what I've become, and it keeps me blessed, and it keeps me honest, and it keeps me open to be able to continue doing things with other people that tackle the social norms.
Yeah. You obviously spoke about 5-6 hours, and Joanna likes to do these multiple scenes. What is it she's looking for in those scenes, and how does she work with actors like yourself in those scenes to keep people interested? And what's her process?
It's that moment. She's looking for that moment. She's looking for that line. She's looking for that look. She's looking for that smile, that twinkle in the eye. She's looking for the whole package, and she knows when she sees it, she'll say, "Right, exactly like that again." And it's just different ways. And she's great at it. Sometimes she'll see it on the first one and say, "Can we have that again?" But because it's a lot of it is ad-libbed, improvised, you put in another line, you put another, with the first one, I was just meant to go out the door, and that was it. So they closed the door, and before Joanna said cut, I knocked on the door and went, "I forgot my coat," and she left that in. That was kind of funny, but it was the vulnerability as well. That's happened to me. I was that man on that stairs, and I've had people that I've walked into my flat and not recognized any of them, and I'm like, "Who are you?" So yeah, it was kind of just going over what and how she wants it. She knows what she wants.
Can you kind of describe what the script for the Souvenir looks like? I don't know if there's a brilliant kind of documentary that's out there on the kind of the special edition Blu-ray where it kind of talks about, like, she likes to work on like mood board style kind of documents. What did you have to hand to kind of guide your scene?
I had Joanna, and that was it. Not even Honor knew that I was going to be there.
Yeah, I've heard things like for Honor that she's often like she doesn't sometimes have the script or knows where the story is going. And that must be such an interesting process for her and for scene partners like yourself to play off of.
So there wasn't it wasn't a mood board. It wasn't. I think she knew what she wanted, and I'm used to improvising. I've been working on a series of my own since 2012 called Asylum, which is all improvised. And I made the Henry Incarcerated film that did quite well in some of the small film festivals. But so kind of throwing you in, not when you haven't got a script and then you put into a situation that's going to take you out your comfort zone. That's where natural words come out and sentences come out, because it's just like it's happening there and then. So when it does, and she says or she hears the line that she wants, she's like, right, have that again. But this time, can you? Or this time, do you think? Or she would say, "What do you think, Jack? What do you think you should do?" And yeah, so it worked quite well, and it was also great having Stephen Higgins there. Because we had that natural sort of friendliness anyway. I found it all quite bohemian. There was a remnants of that in the 90s when I was first sort of using, the student drug houses. This way before I found crack and all that, but it was the sort of bohemian remnants of the 60s and 70s, where you'd sit there and you'd smoke hashish and have a drink, and it'd be really quite nice. Recreational heroin use. It got really big, sort of late 80s, mid 90s, early 90s, because it was cheap. And then the streets were just flooded, so it came into the northern towns and cities. So it was kind of familiar. I'd seen it before. Joanna, she wanted to show that. If I'd have had my way, I'd have made it grittier. And I know what she was trying to, do. But she wanted to show that remnants of the 80s, of that sort of life, how addicts were.
You obviously got to share a scene again with Honor Swinton Byrne. What was it like to work with her again? Obviously the Souvenir was her first kind of role and so on, and she's obviously evolved since then. What was it like to work with her again and spend more time working on scenes together?
Yeah, it was lovely. Honor is absolutely lovely. It was nice to see her again. We were thrown in the deep end. She didn't know I was there. I didn't know she was there. So it was I kind of knew what I was expecting. So, we were taken up in the bus, and then we had to do it. But so it was really nice. It was really nice to see after she, finished the scene. After we finished the scene, we hugged. It was nice to see her again. And it was just, it was kind of familiar. She had other things that she had to do, so she was being whipped off to go and get ready for another scene, or with other people. So we didn't really see a lot of each other on the second part.
One of the key themes and kind of arcs of the film is Julie trying to find out about Anthony and what brought him to addiction and really ultimately death, and trying to find that closure. And there's that really powerful kind of scene at the end with like Richard Ayoade's who plays Patrick, who was like, Anthony was a junkie onwards. Do you feel that kind of those with maybe families, loved ones, friends who have had a friend that perhaps gotten into drugs or lost to addiction, that there's often perhaps this maybe like Julie, this futile looking for kind of meaning behind addiction. What did you kind of think of that journey? Is that kind of the reality of what people sometimes need to hear in that moment, or is it something a bit more complicated?
It's kind of like living at a different frequency, a different out of phase. And losing someone to addiction is obviously, it's heartbreaking for families. But obviously, if you're an addict and you're around addicts, you see it more. And I see it as Richie Ayoade's sort of character has seen that all too many times. There's still a cynicism that comes with addiction. There's still a lot of not understanding. There's a lot of hate towards addicts, and they see it as, well, it's their fault. They come down a certain road, then it's their own fault. Unfortunately, that is the heartbreaking truth. Because if drugs were the problem, you could just stop drugs and that'd be fine. My problem is I'm an addict, and drugs were my solution. So all the trauma I've lived through my life, all that I've kept in this box in the back of my mind, it was my way of keeping that in its box. Addiction is disconnection. It takes you away from yourself. It takes you away from your family. It takes you away from your friends. Because the opposite of addiction is connection. So when we get clean, when we get sober, we build those connections again. So, building the connection with my daughter, with my ex-wife, with some friends and family, building the connection with the kind woman that served me at the food bank one day and that I married in 2019. It's all about reconnecting. And that's the way that I view working on films like this. I don't make those films, really. I don't write kids' books. I work with a certain type of person, and that type of person is a survivor. We were the victims of our own circumstance. We became survivors of the events. And now I'm a thriver. I'm coming up 9 years clean and sober, and I'm a thriver. And me working on these films, on the television programs that I've got to work on, and on the books, and things like other projects. It's about reconnecting with the world, and it's about giving a platform and a voice. And I saw the Souvenir films as a platform, as a way to carry the voice of a million addicts, even if it's just a look, or that bit of body language, that bit of empathy that they can see on the screen, to show that addicts are real. It's they don't live in the shadows; they live just outside of our periphery, and we ignore it. And if anything that I can do to shed light on recovery, I will gladly do.
As anyone that knows you as well, you're a huge film fan. I mean, I just have to look at the background behind you with all of those films and videos. Could you have imagined at your darkest moment, that you would then go on to appear in not one but two Martin Scorsese produced films? Would you have ever believed it? And what's that like to say, oh yeah, I've been in a couple of Martin Scorsese produced films? What's that like for you?
It's bizarre. It is. I do my own podcast, Live and Undrugged, and I speak to a lot of different people. but I reach out to a lot of people. This year is series 3, and I wanted to sort of up my guest content and my quality content. I'm concentrating on creating content, and so I wrote this email, and I sent it to Chesney Hawkes, because Buddy's Song, the film, really is the first film that made me fall in love with films, because it was filmed in Britain. It was about a broken family. I didn't really have a broken family, but I was adopted. I brought up around Roger Daltrey music anyway, but it was the first film that I ever watched. We watched it at school. We watched the original Buddy's Song, the series that they did, also with Roger, and then one of the teachers brought in the rental copy. They rented it of Buddy's Song, the Chesney Hawkes film, and I fell in love with the film. And I sat there and watched it, and then we had a little independent video shop down the bottom of our road called Sid's Video, and he used to rent it to me for £1 a week. It would have been £3.75 for a couple of days, but this was until I learned to pirate. And Buddy's Song meant such a lot to me, because I was being abused at school. I was being bullied by the other kids. I was being abused physically and sexually by some of the staff and the social workers around it. So film was my way of escape. As you can see with all these, this is my escape. VHS is my escape. I don't care for DVD or Blu-ray. I love VHS, the look, the feel, the texture, everything. I love everything about it. And so when I saw Chesney on Twitter talking about Buddy's Song, and he put it onto YouTube, because it never came out on DVD. It's a deleted film. And when I started rebuilding this collection, Buddy's Song was one of the first ones I got. And so I tried, I wanted to connect with Chesney, and I said, I'd love to speak to you over Twitter, and he sent me his email address, and then I sent an email explaining who I was. He now lives in LA, but he was lovely, and explaining what I'd done and about the Martin Scorsese funded films, and being an addict, and loving Buddy's Song because it helps me escape from a gruesome childhood. And within, I think, about 2 hours, I got an email back saying Chesney would love to come on, and I got to speak to him last week.
Oh, amazing! I can't wait to hear that one.
And it's on YouTube now, and I got to speak to him about a lot of different things. We're very similar as people. He works a lot with A21, which fights against human trafficking. My second book was about escaping from human trafficking. My latest book that will be out within the next couple of months, it's about escaping domestic violence. And Chesney, just sat there, and we spoke, and we had a real lovely conversation. He gave me an hour of his time, like this, but live via Zoom on Facebook. And it was really lovely. And then at the end, he offered to help, because he knows what I've really put, and he's kept his word, and we're keeping in touch, and we're building a friendship, and it's great. And the fact that I was able to connect with him because of the film that he did 30 years ago. He didn't realize that the film meant so much to people. And even down to some of his music. It's tied into certain traumas. So it was really nice to do. So film is my medium. It always has been. And whether I can continue to do books or, podcasts or whatever, film will always be my medium, and I will always give time to people like Joanna, no doubt Martin Scorsese's seen it. That blows my mind that I've been seen in a film, not only produced by him, but you know, he's most probably seen me in it. That's. I did think about reaching out to him. I might sort of try and find the courage to do that, but I think it's been enough times passed now since the second one where it wouldn't be taking the mick.
Well, I'm crossing my fingers for that. And if you get the chance, it was released in America, and I had to import it in. But there's a brilliant. It's almost like a 50-minute making of the Souvenir documentary, and it has like a whole section just like Martin Scorsese just talking through the film and his reaction to it and thoughts. I'd really recommend. I know it's not a VHS, but it's definitely worth checking out and hearing his thoughts on the brilliant work that you all did.
Yeah, I'll have to have a look at that. I'd be interested if he has anything to say about my scenes.
You obviously mentioned, you're an actor, a director, a creative. I'm curious, how would you feel if you were on a student film or something like that Julie was making? How would you have handled a director like her in the Souvenir films if that was you as one of her cast or crew?
I've done that. I have done that. When I first got into sort of filmmaking in Norwich before, I'd had a few years sober, and this is before my almighty fall, but yeah, I'd got involved because Norwich has two universities. John Hurt was the patron of New University of Film. So, I worked with a few directors on short films, and they were quite like Julie. Some of them were a force to be reckoned with. There's been some headbanging. The thing about student film and the thing about film in general is there's a lot of personalities. There's a lot of different personalities, and people work at a different pace. People work at a different tone. I've worked with all sorts of directors, nice ones and ones that have been a bit more in your face, to some damn right rude ones that I'll certainly never work with again, that are still working in the industry. But I think it's personalities more than anything. Julie, as a filmmaker, had some of Honor's personality, but also had quite a bit of Joanna's personality in there as well. I love Joanna to bits. I will always rally for Joanna, and if she calls, I will always step out and say yes, no matter what it is, because she gave me my confidence. I wouldn't be doing any of this were it not for her taking that chance on me, and she did take a chance on me. That 8-9 stone addict that was sat in her office, talking to her about a bit about his life, his scruffy hair, and and it was she took a chance on me, and that ultimately for me it paid off, because it gave me confidence to sort of carry on. I'd lost all interest in wanting to get into film. I'd given up on the idea. I'd tried for years and I'd given up on the idea. And then when she when she asked, she gave me that chance. And there's only been a few sort of things that have come off of that. But the confidence that it gave me to carry on doing what I'm doing. It gave me the confidence to come on and speak to people like you, doing podcasts. I'm utterly grateful to you and to some of the other people that allow me to share my voice and ramble on, because I didn't have a voice for such a long time. And that's where my passion is, giving other people a voice. And I'd started to lose it again because I get given other people a voice. So to be able to come on and talk about this and talk about my involvement in films like The Souvenir, it's amazing. I never thought I'd be there. I never thought I'd be here. Here I am sat in my garden shed, surrounded by VHS. And I've got a great life because Joanna gave me the confidence to be able to say, yeah, this is what I want to do. And I get to consult occasionally. I get to speak occasionally. A little while ago, I got to speak to a room full of training GPs about my life, and about, how GPs can help addicts. Never in a million years would I have ever thought about doing anything like that. I now speak to former bank robbers, convicted terrorists, who've all changed their lives, who have all, to varying degrees of success. To me, success is, having what I've got now, and anything outside of that is absolutely fantastic. And I feel like the most successful person in the world. Do I want to be a big film star? Probably not, but I do. I do prefer to be behind the camera. But it's nice to step in front of the camera and be people like Ray.
We follow obviously Julie's rise as a director and a creator. How would you describe your rise as a creator? And would you sort of share any parallels with the character of Julie, or are you both very, very different people?
I guess we're kind of different. I've always questioned. I've always been creative, always. Even when I couldn't get it down on paper, like we've discussed before, I learned to read and write as an adult. But creativity has always been that part of me. I love to create, and I love to create different worlds and different characters. That's why I was such a good hustler, such a good con man, because I could create these characters. So I kind of try to put a lot of that into my work. A lot of the work that I do, even before Joanna came calling, was improvisation based. I love the art of improvisation because it's just a lot more raw. The asylum stuff that I've done, and the experiment with and the book that's coming about that. It's all about that rawness that comes from and the catharsism that comes from making a character, and the director saying, right, in the process of asylum, it was right, mental health, addiction, homelessness, disability. These are all outlawed. We now live in a country where it's all outlawed, and if you're picked up and you're put into an asylum, and you're given these interviews before you're given a chip on your brain, which is basically a lobotomy. Your choice of who you are, go. And you'll find that a lot of the people, myself included, we use some of the trauma that we've had in our past. We use some of the situations, and we bring it forward. And there's a great catharsis in using reality in improvisation, because it gives you the chance to say things that you wouldn't usually say, and hide it behind fiction, hide truth behind fiction. There's a lot of truth in the things that, the improvisation that I've done. So I like to work on improvisation. I've written a few scripts, and we've worked on a few sort of shorts with scripts based, but that tends to get put to one side. And I like the actors, like Joanna, I like the actors to do what comes naturally to them. Because if you, it's more natural, then it's more raw, and it doesn't feel forced. There are times when you watch a film and you can hear the way that they speak and the tonality. It's like they're reading off the page, and it's a real bugbear of mine. I like authenticity in acting. Um,
When did you get to see the Souvenir Part 2 for the first time, and what was your reaction?
so I wasn't able to go to the. I was invited to both of the sort of cast events to watch them. I wasn't able to make either of them. I have a disabled wife, and I have commitments with my family, and I have some health issues myself, so I wasn't able to go. So I didn't really see it until, I guess, 2021, sort of during lockdown, because I had COVID. So I think I watched it then.
And what did you think of the film when you watched it the first time? Because it's quite different from the first one. It's very much almost a meta take on that first film. Were you surprised by that, seeing the kind of full story and how it unfolded, and did you enjoy it?
It was sort of, it kind of reminded me of like the way that extras, Ricky Gervais's extras was formatted and jumping in and out of, he's a person playing a character, playing another character, working with people playing a sort of a enhanced over, what's the word, sort of overzealous version of themselves, like Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, to name a few. That they're kind of over the top versions of themselves, and I guess I kind of saw that as it was the first thing that I saw that was really quite, apart from that was quite meta, and it just brought me back to being on the set. We watching them make this film, and they've made a set of the stairs, which was and the flat and stuff, which was a set in the first one, and then they're working on that, and then she's playing, Honor is playing herself, playing sort of Julie with a lot of Joanna in there, but as Joanna watches over, so it was all kind of a surreal experience, and just it was. I was watching on the screen as they were filming what was happening behind me with all the PAs and the the grips and stuff like that, and things that I'd experienced earlier that day and on other film sets. So it was quite, it was quite bizarre to watch, but it was pretty accurate, I would have to say.
Brilliant. And obviously you mentioned, books, podcasts, work that you've done. Where's kind of the best place for folk listening to this to find all of this, Jack?
Yeah, so I'm actually at the moment I'm rebuilding my website, which is jwgreg.wordpress.com. All the Live and Undrugged, which is the podcast, they were all on one page, but because I've done 70 odd of them, and hot linked it to YouTube, so the YouTube video comes up, it kept crashing the page every time I tried to go on it, so I'm having to compile it down into series. So the first series is on there, and I'm working on getting the second series and the third series, which is now currently happening, on there within the next couple of weeks. It can also be seen on the Accidental Journalist Facebook page as it happens. I'm on Twitter. I've just started using TikTok, really. And I've been doing this a few years now, but I've just started taking sort of snippets of, I've spent the past week re-downloading all the videos and taking snippets from the videos and making little adverts and then putting them on on TikTok, so they can all be there. They can all be found on there. My books can be found on my website. They can be found on Amazon. Just type in Jack W. Gregory and they're on there.
Fantastic. Well, there's so much there for people to dive into, and thank you so much for coming back on it again to share your stories and experiences. It's always it's always a privilege to be able to hear that and hear your honesty as well behind everything. So hopefully we'll have you back on for a third Martin Scorsese produced A24 film in a few years.
We're praying for that.